This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Terry Moore. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, and on this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Terry Moore. The final issue in his Rachel Rising series comes out this week on May 25th, and I have a great time talking with Terry about the series wrap-up. But before we get into that conversation, I want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that go higher from there. And if you check out dcbservice.com right now, you'll see that you can find the first 6 volumes of Rachel Rising at 35% off the cover price. It's a great way to get caught up on this landmark horror series. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. I've been following Rachel Rising from the very first issue released in August of 2011. I've been a devoted follower, and in fact, I've continued reading this title when I've let quite a number of others drop over the past couple of years. But I could always rely on a great story from Terry Moore, and whether you like horror or not, this is definitely a series that you should check out. The final issue of the series, number 42, is going to be released on May 25th. When I talked to Terry, I had not yet read the final issue of Rachel Rising, so like all of you, I still don't know how Terry is going to wrap up the series, what happens to Rachel, Beck, Jet, Zoe, Lilith, Malice, and everyone else in this series. So it was interesting, but also there was quite a bit of anticipation as I was talking to Terry. We had a great conversation, so let's listen to that now. I'm pleased to have as a guest on the Comics Alternative Terry Moore. The final issue of Rachel Rising will be coming out on May 25th, which is, I think, quite an occasion. This is a long-running series. Terry, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I will resist the temptation to ask you how things are going to wrap up because we don't believe in spoilers on this podcast. But for those of us who have been on board with Rachel Rising from the very beginning, back in 2011, roughly speaking, what do we have in store?
Well, we're going to wrap up the major storyline. I can tell you that much. Mm-hmm. The basic starting plot for the entire series was somebody killed Rachel. Who? And that was the driving story. Then a lot of stuff happened along the way. So we need closure for that.
Yeah, it is interesting that early on in the series, there was that big mystery of who killed Rachel. But then, at least I as a reader, forgot about that once we got into the characters Lilith and Malice. And I think that speaks to your ability as a writer in that you carried us away from what we assumed was the MacGuffin there, that which is driving the narrative, in a way that we forgot that Rachel was murdered by someone specifically and she was looking for that individual. by bringing in her friend Jet, Zoe, Lilith, Mollis, and then we lost the killer.
Well, and page 1 of the series gave you a heads up that would happen. It's a quote from Plato saying, death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. So it may seem paramount that, somebody killed me. That's a big deal. Everything should be on the back burner until we resolve that. But it's actually not the worst thing in the world. And there are bigger issues, and even in the deceased person's life, there are bigger issues than their own death. So it's part of an ongoing theme to try to take a look at death, not so much remove the sting, but just to stick it up on a wall and look at it from every angle. I think as living human beings, we tend to look at death as like a blind man feeling his way through a big machine. You know, we're intimidated and we're scared. We don't understand it. We can't see all of it. And but there's just so much to it for a writer to explore and for a philosopher to explore.
Now, you mentioned that allusion to Plato at the very beginning of this issue, but issue 1 of Rachel Rising. But this is something that you do in most of your comics. You begin each issue with a quote. Now, sometimes the quote is from one of the characters that you're creating, but more times than not, it's from another source.
I did that as a pragmatic thing, actually. When I learned in Strangers in Paradise, my first series, which I don't think did this, people would tell me, I grabbed the issue and I read it in the car while I was driving home or sitting in the parking lot, or, I read it while I was mowing the lawn. And I that's just not what a writer wants to hear, that, you're reading it, especially if I write something that's supposed to be reflective and you're reading it while you're walking through the building lobby and in the elevator surrounded by people, and you're not in the mood at all. You're not in the moment. So I began to establish this page 1 thing as a device to get you out of reality and beam you up to my world, Star Trek style. It's the only beam up device I have to get you kind of back into my world before you turn the page.
So it kind of sets a stage or a tone of the way that you as a writer want to be approached.
Yeah, and the lines, the words that I use and for each issue are kind of setting a tone. If there was going to be a study question after the chapter, that would be it would be launched off that quote.
Now, we were talking about the progress of those first several issues, I guess your first narrative arc, where fairly early on we are diverted momentarily from the mystery surrounding Rachel's death. When you and I last spoke, or I guess communicated, and we should point out for those who may not be aware that I spoke with you briefly in 2013 at a Dallas con, and then you and I did an email-based interview that went up almost exactly 2 years ago now. It went up in May of 2014. And, we were talking about the progression that the series was making, and I think at that point, issue number 24 had just come out, which... if I remember correctly, wraps up, at least to some degree, the Lilith story. Something happens to Lilith, and it seemed like a turning point. Did you feel that issue was a turning point for the series?
It did, in terms of Lilith is going to destroy the town of Manson. It kind of brought that whole arc to its knees. When we get past that issue, that's not the end of Lilith. But when we get past that issue, the agenda has broadened, and it's funny how her own death has a gateway for that. It opens up it for her. It's again going with a theme that death is not the end. On the other side of it, it broadens up more spectrum on Lilith. But the whole thing of oh, I'm mad about what happened, in the past with this town. So I'm here for a purpose against this town. There's actually a very sweet scene on the after issue 24 where Lilith and Rachel are confronting each other again, and there's a barter. Rachel negotiates for her town's safety, and she agrees to a pact with Lilith for a new purpose.
So now, when you were laying out the series toward the beginning, did you know that you would take a slightly different tack after issue 24, or you would have a slightly adjusted focus, or was this something that evolved over time?
Well, it wasn't issue specific. I'm not a chess master with great layouts like that. I work more organically, and when I begin a series like this, I have an emotional feel for the characters. I have these moments in my mind, pre-death, post-death, the dynamic of the characters, what is possible in their world, and how they will move and dance with each other through the story. Those big notes are what I have. Then the details and the harmony and all that kind of stuff, I develop as I go, like a composer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot like trying to figure out a little symphony. You have these ideas in your head when you start, and you explore these themes that you've been carrying around for a long time, and you flesh them out, and then you begin to see sections and an overarch, and then you think of counterpoint, and you bring the rest of it in there that makes it lush.
So you had a broader sense of where you wanted to go, but nothing planned out, at least that you were wedded to in too much detail.
Right. I if you start backtracking, this idea began years ago when I was doing a little bit of work for DC Comics, and I simply had the idea of a dead girl, some girl who wouldn't die. And that was just the basic seed of the idea. And the rest of it, by the time it was Dead Girl's turn to become a project for me, I had added all this other stuff into it. Usually what happens is when I'm doing a series is I'll just throw everything I'm about into it. So when I was doing Strangers in Paradise, I was really into relationships and rights and love and acceptance. And these days I'm more into trying to cope with this extremely violent world, and we're all going to die, and how are we going to get out of this, and what hope do we have? So it's a way of exploring the hopes and the themes and somehow connecting everything from Einstein to romance to the 10 o'clock news and making sense out of it.
That's ambitious.
It is, isn't it? And that's exactly the kind of thing that loopy writers do when they sit too long in their studios day after day after day, and they go there. Some people say, I'm not going there, but yeah, a writer goes there.
Well, I think if someone, especially our listeners who are gaga over Rachel Rising, and there are a lot of them out there.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm one of those. But if those readers kind of pull back and look at your larger body of work, even if they just stick with, let's say, the creator-owned stuff, not necessarily the contractual stuff that you do for other publishers. I mean, they can see a lot of that, as you put it, a little bit of everything in your work. In Rachel Rising, I mean, obviously we have a kind of a gothic horror story, but it deals with these larger issues of life, death, our relationship to death, quite a number of ethical issues. But you see something similar going on in Echo, your previous series, but in different ways. It deals with issues of science, faith, morality, which is different from the previous series, Strangers in Paradise, which deals with relationships in a variety of different ways, which is very different from, Strangers in Paradise Kids, which is more like a Charles Schultz interlude, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, in other words, you're bringing in a lot of different ideas into your work, and I think for someone to look at one of your series and put their finger on that and say, yes, this is who Terry Moore is, I think would be doing you a disservice.
Well, thank you. There is it's funny when I look at the comic book series themselves. The tone, the subject matter of the series is more like just the facade of whatever philosophy is behind the series, like Strangers in Paradise is exploring relationships and all that. It's more like looking at our day-to-day life and trying to make sense of our daily walk, whereas Echo is taking the same people that could have done that, but we're looking more at earth sciences approach, like how do we fit in with nature. And then you look at the Rachel Rising series, it's again characters with relationships and everything, but they're looking at it from a standpoint of more of a Terra-based organic search for our identity. Here we are on Earth, and we're part of the process, and we come and go. Without trying to look at the next galaxy, and for foregoing all molecular subatomic analysis, what's our biological purpose here? How do we fit in? Those are the motivations, the motors behind my ideas, actually. And then you get to Sip Kids, and it's just looking at adults as they're just miniature adults. I see adults as just tall kids. So it was as easy as writing the adult version. It was just goofier. We're just make even bigger fools of ourselves. So it's fun for me to armchair life, and I just happen to have a cartooning pencil in my hand while I do it.
Now, I remember a couple of years ago when we were doing this email-based interview, you mentioning Sip Kids. What was the motivation behind doing that? Did you just want to do something different? Did you want to do something more strip-like?
Well, yeah, I do love strips. I grew up wishing I could do that. And I never really got that out of my system. So it was fun for me to go back and do that, and just to express the fun of life and the happiness of the characters that I knew so well. When you're 6 years old, there's not a lot of baggage, but you still have your same personality and your same little agendas that are forming. So it was the Strangers in Paradise characters, but they weren't trying to save the world. They were just arguing over, a soccer ball. But it still works. They're still doing it the same way. So I just thought it was so cute. It was fun to do.
And in some cases, I remember looking at a page of Sip Kids, and you could read a page almost like a newspaper gag strip, where you have just a few panels where the first one is the setup and the last one on the page is something like a punchline or the payoff. So they worked really well, not only as a continuous story, each issue, but a number of interlinked situations and gags.
Yeah, and that's just my old cartooning timing and everything like that. It's just a classic approach. I wasn't trying to reinvent comics or comic telling or the craft. I was just having fun with characters. It's very old school, and it's a gas. It really is. It's like driving a car fast. It's just fun to be just a cartoonist.
Yeah. Well, did you have any creators or strips specifically in mind when you thought about Sip Kids?
Well, obviously, it's a complete visual homage to Charles Schulz, who's my pinnacle mentor. Even when I was a little boy, under the age of 10, he was my hero, and I would see articles about him living in a beautiful house with big windows looking out over the trees, and he wore a sweater, and he just drew cartoons all day and didn't have to go to a regular job. I just thought he was the greatest thing in the world. I thought that's what I want to do. If I can't be George Harrison, I want to be Charles Schultz. So
George Harrison was your first choice?
Well, yeah, it was. George Harrison was sexier. He had a sexier life, but Charles Schultz's quiet life was really appealing to me too. So there was my Jekyll and Hyde ambitions right there. So I don't know. I actually ended up both those influences kind of carried me through my entire life. It's always been a salt and pepper life for me, with a guitar in one hand and a pencil in the other. And I'm so surprised that I kind of got where I wanted to get, but I did it with cartooning. So I'm just glad I have it.
Well, maybe as a way of getting back to Rachel Rising, one of the things I see as a connection between that and Sip Kids is the strip Lizzie that you began including in some issues of Rachel Rising. That for our listeners who may not be aware, I mean, that is like a classic gag strip, but it deals with a character based on Lizzie Borden.
Yes. What is more funny than Lizzie Borden? What more lighthearted topic can you pick, you know? And there exactly is, in a nutshell, what you need to know. I mean, you take something like Lizzie Borden and you turn it on its head and give it to a cartoonist, and you can get this wonderful black humor out of it. It's just, I don't know. It's just, that's the kind of tension you need to make something work, to make something funny. You need that. I have never done a strip about a choir girl who did everything right and everybody agreed with her. You have nothing to work with, right? So you pick somebody like Lizzie Borden, and you will never run out of material, because she just doesn't fit. It's the tension and the mismanagement of life that are funny. Charles Schultz actually said it and put it best. He said, "There's nothing funny about winning. Humor is based off of losing." So somebody like Lizzie Borden, obviously, I mean, she's a loser. And so, if you can back off of the crime scene and look at it through, cartoonist sunglasses, then you might find. I tried to find the humor in there, and it's actually it's the same thing Charles Addams did when he was doing the Addams Family and Wednesday and all that. You take these macabre themes and you stick a pin in them, and you lampoon them. And it helps take the sting out of them. We laugh at them because we desperately want to laugh at death. We want to laugh at our own mortality to take the onus off of it. It'd be wonderful if death was something that it turned out to be a joke, that it was no big deal at all, and it was something we should have been laughing at all along, because on the other side is something way, way, way better, which is another quote that got into. I ended the Rachel Rising series with another Plato quote that bookended the entire series. And Plato continued his original thought of death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. He continued that thought by saying, we treat death like it's the worst thing that can possibly happen, but we don't know. It's arrogant for us to assume that it's so. How do we know that it's not the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to us? So that's kind of what I hope to do when I just kind of prick these little terrible subjects and try to take the sting out of them, and in order to look at them and laugh at them and stand side by side with them. Actually, if we keep everything at arm's distance, you'll never know it. You'll never understand it. So you have to get closer to these things, and humor helps do that.
It's interesting that you're mentioning now this juxtaposition of different moods, different tones, even different genres, like, humor and gothic horror. And what you did with the character Lizzie Borden in your Lizzie strips. And then, you mentioned the Addams Family. I see one of my favorite characters in the Rachel Rising series is Zoe. And I see her as integral in quite a number of ways, one of which is as a comic relief. I mean, do you see her serving that role?
Yes, I do. And putting her in the same room with Lilith, who has, ruled empires and thinks everyone is beneath her. And then Zoe walks into the room and says, well, you must not have been very good because all those empires are gone. So, there's somebody there that can wag their fingers at royalty.
And there's that, I think that when I first felt that Zoe had that role, or that was one of the roles that she was playing in Rachel Rising, is in issue 25. If we had a temporary pause with the Lilith part of this narrative in issue 24, and then in issue 25, it's almost as if you're tacking, temporarily, at least in a different direction. We see the town of Manson trying to clean up after itself, specifically cleaning up all of the rats. And there's this image of Zoe sitting outside, smoking a cigar, putting firecrackers in the mouth of the rats, lighting them with a cigar, dumping them in the garbage can, and letting them explode. Now, outside of the horrific vision of that, it's funny. I mean, first off, a girl sitting there with a cigar.
Well, you have to remember Zoe is 50 years old.
Right. Yeah.
She only looks like a 10-year-old. And there's an entire textbook there in that whole theme. But yeah, I mean, I wanted, Zoe, if you didn't know that she was a little girl and you just read this character Z, and Z does this and Z does that, well, you could think it was a 60-year-old creepy man, a typecast serial killer. And I just thought it was funny in Rachel Rising to give the role of serial killer to a 10-year-old girl. I love to miscast. I no longer believe in hero journey stories or typecasting. So there's a lot of fun in having familiar words come out of the wrong mouth. So that's worked for me in all my series.
Now, without giving too much away, because there may be a number of our listeners who not only have not yet read the final issue of Rachel Rising, which will be coming out in a couple of days when this podcast episode goes up, but they may have not read the last several issues. But just suffice it to say that Zoe is an important part of this series wrap-up. And I'm wondering if the importance that you're giving to Zoe in the wrap-up, but I mean, even, I guess, throughout the entire series, is this something that you had planned from the beginning, or did her importance kind of grow more organically as the story developed?
No, she's a missing link. She's a connection that happens between Rachel's world and Lilith's world, and by Lilith's world, I also mean the baggage that she brings with her involving malice and the world agenda, the larger agenda. And Zoe is that little messenger. She's the Silver Surfer that has seen it all, and she's the herald. But she's, her own tortured little character. She's a victim of all this in her own way, an uncomplaining victim, by the way. She suffers quietly. She never brings her problems to the others, except for one tender moment with Rachel. But yeah, she's very important to have somebody like that in there. You can't have a bunch of regal pyramids and no way to get between them. So she's the way we scamper between and connect these things.
Now, with your first series, your first creator-owned series, Strangers in Paradise, I mean, this is something that every now and again you come back to. And as you pointed out in our interview from a couple of years ago, that's something that your fans definitely want you to do, is to come back to, Ketchu, Francine, everybody in the Strangers in Paradise world. But with Echo and with Rachel Rising, I mean, these are much more contained stories. Do you imagine any possibility of doing something with the world that you've created in Rachel Rising after you wrap up issue 42?
Yeah. I wrote a TV pilot, and I'm working very hard to get a TV series with it.
And I remember that there was some buzz about that a few years ago. So this is something that is still a possibility?
Yes. It's looking very good, and we have a package. We have a script. We've secured a wonderful director, and I have great representation and a great team. It's quite a team now. So it's a pretty serious effort, and the package will go out to networks very soon. And then after that, we just cross our fingers and hope somebody bites.
Well, I know that Rachel Rising is definitely not a zombie narrative. I mean, Rachel and Jet may be undead to a large degree, but they're definitely not zombies. But I'm curious, do you think that the success of the Walking Dead TV series and its spinoff has maybe paved the way a tad for something like a Rachel Rising TV show?
Well, maybe in the same way that John Wayne making action movies maybe paved the way for Steve McQueen to make movies.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. It's, I don't think you can be a clone of anything that's out there and find success. So if there's something successful out there, you better not emulate it because it's already done. So you have to find your own slant on things. But it does help warm up the audience for what you want to do. It's like an opening act, even though the opening act may be the Beatles. I mean, the Walking Dead is the Beatles of undead themes, movies, TV shows. So everything that comes after that, they open the door. But you can't be Walking Dead 2 or you're doomed.
Right.
So.
And when I asked that question, I was thinking of something that's actually quite timely. Now, at the time of this recording, it hasn't been aired yet, but it will have been when it goes up. The I guess series premiere of Preacher on AMC, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think that was a great series in comics, one of my favorites. I don't know if something like that would have been accepted by executives, would actually have become a TV series before the success of The Walking Dead. And maybe I'm wrong here, but it gets back to something that you said just a second ago, and that is the opening act, right? Like the Beatles, something like The Walking Dead opening the door and making it maybe a tad easier for other series that may have had a more difficult time to actually find an audience.
Yeah, everything that airs is kicking the boundary more. Mm-hmm. So if something comes out in year 13 and kicks boundaries for 4 years, by the time somebody comes along 4 years later, they have a little easier time getting those themes going. It's like, I remember, let's see, somebody was talking the other day on a TV documentary about the first time somebody said the word sucks on TV. And it had never been allowed before. Somebody said it and got away with it. And then the following week, Johnny Carson used it 3 times in his monologue. That's how it works. It's like the first lesbian kiss, the first time you can say shit, and, that kind of stuff. It's everything is kicking the door. And if you watch South Park, you realize that all this is controlled by a bunch of porpoises in a tank anyway. So we're just trying to please the porpoises in the tank and get away with as much as we can.
Now, will you want to keep as much edge as possible in a television Rachel Rising?
I don't care about TV's limits and the edge and all that. Yeah, I think you would have to be a diehard TV person, like that's your whole world, to feel like you're trying to make your stamp on TV. I'm just a storyteller who wants my story out to as many people as possible. I found a limited audience with comics, and I have a lot of TV experience in my background, in my life. So it's just it's another medium that I'm comfortable with, and I would be happy to work in to get the same stories back out to more people.
And you're the primary writer adapting for television?
Yeah, it has to be me because I've tried to hand it twice. I've let other people write a pilot for this and something else, and it just comes off like fan fiction because they take the big notes and then they just kind of do their own thing. Well, they're not me, and the charm is not in the sequence of events. The charm is in the characterization. That's the only asset I have in life, is not my clever ideas, but my good characters. And you can't assume somebody else can do that. It's like being a composer who has a knack for writing a certain type of stuff, and then somebody says, "Well, look, I have a composer over here who can write too. So just tell us what key you write in." Oh, I'll write in the key of C. Okay, well, just hack something out in C. It's like that. It ends up reading like that. So the only way it's ever going to work is for me to write it.
Well, what about the possibility in the past, as well as maybe future possibilities of your other narratives being adapted to television or other media?
That's the goal. I'm hopefully, if I can get Rachel Rising placed, I already have a contract on Echo as well, and I'm writing the screenplay for that, a movie. And if those two could get rolling, then somebody is naturally, they're going to say, "Well, do you have anything else?" And I'm going to say, "Just so happens I have this wonderful story that would make a good long-running TV series called Strangers in Paradise." So it's a 1-2-3 punch.
So you definitely would like to bring Strangers in Paradise to television.
I do want to do that, and I think it would be perfect for TV. TV is about characters, and these are wonderful characters. And Kachu is an iconic character. I think it's the kind of show that would run for a long time.
When you find yourself interacting with fans, whether you're at cons or people contact you about your art or wanting to know more about what you're working on, any kind of reader reaction you get, do they tend to ask more about Strangers in Paradise, and maybe not as much about Echo or Rachel Rising? And if so, do you find that charming or maybe a tad frustrating?
Honestly, these days it's equally split between the three. But when you get to Strangers in Paradise, people are more emotional and very loyal, especially if it had any effect on their life or their identity, helping them figure out identity when they're young and things like that, finding affirmation, acceptance. But that people have liked I get an equal amount from all three series, actually. And I think that's because Echo and Rachel Rising are currently in production in other countries. So that's kind of reinforcing. It keeps them, it keeps Echo relative, and Strangers in Paradise is still in production in all the other countries and everything too. So it just kind of keeps it all alive. It's all still in the now. You would think Strangers in Paradise is something that happened 20 years ago, but it's not. It's still in print and still reaching people.
Well, do you have, in addition to the SIP Kids, do you have any more immediate plans of introducing in comic form more Strangers in Paradise narratives?
I would not rule it out, but the drawing takes so long, and time is running out. I'm getting older and older and older. And I also don't think that the market will bear another long series from me. So I would have to work in very short spurts from now on. like 3 to 6 to 9 issues tops. Do it all within 1 year and then get out. After that, you lose complete retail support. So you have to get in, release the book real quick, get out. So it would be different in the future.
Yeah. Well, I remember a couple of years ago in our interview, you had mentioned that you would like to go on with Rachel Rising as long as the market permitted. But if it didn't, if there wasn't as much attention or as much return, you may end the series sooner or later. Now, issue number 42, which comes out on the 25th, will be the very last issue of Rachel Rising. In maybe a more perfect world, I mean, had you wanted to extend it beyond that and actually take it as far as it could go?
Yes, I did. And if the sales had supported it, I would have. But they didn't. So I'm just going to turn my attention to TV and try to do it there.
One of the things I'm really fascinated by is what a creator or a creative team needs to do and what it has to do in order to end a story sooner than it had intended. So with Rachel Rising, did you have, let's say, a tentative backup plan that if it ended sooner rather than later, this is how you would end the story? Or if it lasted a little longer, you would end it in a different way, or at least extend the narrative in different ways. And then if it ended even later, if you had, quite a big return on it, would the story have evolved in a completely different way? In other words, did you have any contingency plans?
You have contingency plans, but it depends on whether you are able, or if you're going to be able to survive long enough to do them. It's kind of like a burning building situation. So I took the heat and suffered through the last 10 issues. It took me 10 issues to wrap it up. And it was really uncomfortable period as, watching your sales go down. But I couldn't, if I ended it quicker than that, it just would have ruined everything. You have to be able to tell, finish the piece. But I could have easily kept going. I mean, imagine if it was Peter Pan and sales are going low in the series, so you have to stop it when Peter finally gets Wendy and the kids to Neverland. And you say, oh, look, here we are in Neverland. Isn't it great? The end. Yeah, there was more. But, you need the ability to, the environment to do that.
It's interesting that you say that the last 10 issues you were taking the heat. And I guess I have a couple of questions based on what you just said. One is I saw issue 32 almost as kind of a little breathing space. It's almost like a standalone issue. And this is where you have the accident where the woman is beheaded. She runs into the back of a lumber truck. And then her fiance is seen afterward on top of the water tower. I mean, that struck me as something that's definitely a part of the Rachel Rising world, but almost like a tangential story to the larger themes that are going on there. So after that does give us these last 10 issues. And so I guess my question is, did you see issue 32 as kind of a breathing spot in order for you to get a sense of this is how I'm going to end it? And then the other question I have there is, was there heat? I mean, economic heat in these last 10 issues? I mean, was it difficult for you to continue putting these out? I mean, was the market really not as good as you would like?
Yeah, it wasn't. The sales were just barely tolerable. So it was really determination to keep going on it. And you can't complain too much about that. People don't want to hear that. So I did complain once, and I'm sorry I said anything because people rallied around, and it was kind of embarrassing. So after that, I just kind of kept my mouth shut and thought, okay, well, Terry, just do whatever you got to do. If you can go, go. If you have to stop, stop. So I just went as long as I could. And 32, that issue was one of those things where I always had in mind that there were, the stories of Manson. It was like the Naked City. There's a million stories here. Everything in Manson is wrong. Everything in this little town is wrong. And even if you just look at a typical day in Aunt Johnny's life, Aunt Johnny is the town medical examiner. You would find something like this, something that went terribly wrong in these people's lives once they got inside the city limits. It's just something. There's some sort of evil vibe in this town that and that issue was a good way of a one-shot issue of exploring that. I could do that for the rest of my life, do stories like that. But, and it's good to have a breather once in a while when you're in a long series, because if you keep hammering away at, oh, look at this character, look at her again, look at her again, look at her again, it's tiresome. So you need to back off a little bit, get a breather, It's just the dynamic of performance.
This is interesting, you bringing up Aunt Johnny, because when you said that just now, I thought, Aunt Johnny could be Quincy, and you could have something like a procedural within the city of Manson or something like that, a town where things are really screwed up. And then you have someone like a Quincy and Aunt Johnny who is able to solve mysteries, or at least attempts to.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. I actually approached that story as a procedural. She starts off with the accident investigation, trying to figure it out, and finds the bitten off finger in the back of the throat, and what's the story here? Da da da. Of course, I have a cheating bar with Rachel coming in and touching the dead woman and and seeing the truth. So it's I cheated, but yeah, I mean that's fun. I love all that stuff growing up. It was all a big influence on me.
Wow, Johnny is Quincy. That's interesting. In fact, Aunt Johnny does seem to have a more prominent role in the second half of the series. I mean, she's an important character from the very beginning, but it just struck me in going back and rereading everything before our interview that she seems to come more to the fore after issue, I guess, 24 or 25. Did you feel that was the case? Did you consciously try to bring her out more?
Well, I think she becomes more involved as her niece Rachel needs her more. Beforehand, it was more of a lighthearted, less pressure on the relationship. But once Rachel gets to a point where she needs Aunt Johnny and Aunt Johnny's insight, they become closer, and what they're both trying to accomplish becomes intertwined. So I think it was a natural coming together in a time of need when your family rallies around you, and Aunt Johnny is the only family Rachel has.
You've mentioned a couple of occasions in the series where there have been tender moments, or more tender than otherwise moments, between maybe Lilith and Rachel, or between Zoe and Rachel. But to me, some of the most tender spots in this series involve Earl.
Yeah. Earl is my monster, my Frankenstein, and because I like to miscast, he turns out to be the most decent person in the entire series. And finally, somebody sees that in the story, and I thought that was beautiful.
When you created Earl, did you have Tor in mind?
No. That would be a no.
Okay.
You're talking about the... No,
the actor, Plan 9, the big guy, bald, and, given that Earl is big and bald, and you referred to him as kind of a monster on first appearance, but he's someone very gentle underneath.
Yeah. Earl is somebody I've been drawing since high school. This big guy with thick glasses and unattractive stuff happening below his eyes. I don't know. I've just always had that character, and he never said anything in all of my cartooning. And finally, in Rachel, he finally starts mumbling, and then it turns out there was a pivotal moment where you still don't know Earl, and he closes the door in a room with Jet's body, and you're fearing the worst. Every reader was fearing the worst, and then he reveals himself, in the more altruistic sense. He opens up his heart and reveals and says who he really is. And it turns out the guy is, an eloquent romantic. So I don't know. I thought that was a pretty attractive thing to watch some flower bloom out of that crap pile.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, that scene that you just referenced, I mean, I think that was one of the high points of the series, especially early on, because, I mean, you really do set things up to where we as readers are expecting something even more horrific to happen than the things that had already taken place by that point. When he, is in the coroner's examination room by himself with Jet, he looks at her, he goes over to the laptop that has a camera on it, he closes it. It's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? But he expresses himself in a very human way.
Yeah. And it's, that was finally getting to do something that I set out to do in Rachel, which was write a story in comic book form where I would get the reader to fill in the blanks and make it worse than what I was actually writing. The reader is the one who provided the horror in that moment. Earl technically didn't do anything wrong. We just assumed the worst. And that way I'm having you participate in the fright. And it's all in the setup, But by doing that, this comic book has invoked a real emotion in you, which is an amazing thing when you think about it. Isn't it amazing that you could draw a scene in a comic book that would actually, stir any emotion in you? So that's one of the rewards of working in comics, is that you can do that. You can craft scenes that may actually move people, and good and bad. I wanted to get the hair standing up on your arm, if you can write a story in a comic that makes people tear up, you can also get them to be afraid. It's all in the setup. Your person just gets lost in the read. They're there in the moment, and the magic happens,
Now, getting back to Earl and his relationship with Jet, that's something that does develop, especially in this last half of the series. But something that we see from the very beginning is the relationship between Rachel and Jet. And, when I first saw that, I couldn't help but think of the relationship between Francine and Kachu. And I'm wondering if you had that earlier relationship in mind when you were thinking through the way that Jet and Rachel were friends.
Well, only in the sense that I had seen it before. And this is one of the things that I've noticed as I travel. Being a cartoonist, you travel to all the cities every year to go to the shows, and so I see the people in all these cities, and I can do it's great for comparing people. And I may see two best friends in New York, and then I go to Chicago and I see another two best friends, and they're doing this exact same thing. And then I go to Beaumont, Miami, Dallas, Houston. Everywhere I go, I see those two best friends, and they're doing and they're behaving the same way. They talk the same way. They hug each other the same way. It's just the human race does the same thing. We're all made the same. So it's an ongoing common thing to not have two women that are very close in a cast of characters would be false. I've never been anywhere that I couldn't find two women who were friends and sharing their lives with each other. It's important. It's actually biologically important for women to share their lives with some other people. So it's that may be hard for some men to understand. Men tend to want to just be loners, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. I've always been fascinated by that.
Do you find it easier to write relationships based on women and the way that they look at life versus male relationships?
Yeah, it's black and white. I mean, they're so different. They're very, very different. So yeah, and I spent a long time looking at, how women what they have to deal with on this planet. It's an incredible thing. It's worthy of anybody's time and attention to pay attention to what women have to go through to get through the day and get through their lives in this world.
Well, do you have readers respond to your sensitivity to this issue? I mean, I'm wondering, has anyone ever said, well, you're a male, how can you write about these relationships because it's from an experience that you really don't have?
Well, I in terms of the relationship, I don't try to write from the inside of the relationship. I write from the outside. I'm an observer. The trick is to not be observing with a male gaze, right? So I'm not watching you need to have the right frame of mind in approaching this. And I think probably the bottom line is to just be truthful with what you see. Don't color it with a male gaze. Don't color it with sexuality or anything. You just need to be truthful to the human beings that you're addressing. I would approach writing women the same way that I would approach writing say a Buddhist monk. I'm not a Buddhist monk, but I think I could, if I paid enough attention and thought about it long enough, that I could probably write a story and give a somewhat accurate portrayal of what it's like to watch a Buddhist monk go through some sort of a story. It's like that, Just to think that we can't write about anything but ourselves starts a form of separatism that is not healthy. So it's actually, I think it's better for somebody to try to, for us to try to put ourselves in other people's shoes. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably, if you look at something like Black Lives Matter, that's the bottom line of what they're saying. And the point of it is for crying out loud, people, put yourselves in our shoes. Look at this look at what's happening from our standpoint, and that's what we all need to be doing. Put yourself in the other people's shoes and walk a mile and see what you think it's like to be an attractive woman and have to put up with all that crap every day, or a black kid with a hoodie and try to go to the store. You see what it's like. And the more we would do that, the more empathy we would find. So I think that if you can get, some white bread guy like me, who's middle of the road, to look at something like that and then write in an emotional, supportive piece about it, I would also bring all this other stuff that comes with it, that helps frame it. If somebody is writing from inside the problem, they're so full of emotion in their own framework that we may tend to categorize them as, oh, well, you're just complaining because you're that. But if somebody in my standpoint says, wait, stop, look at the woman issues, look at the black issues, look at the Asian people being completely shut out of Hollywood movies, that kind of thing. We're exactly the people that need to be talking about it. We should be writing about it. We need to stop writing about ourselves and how great we are. We need to start thinking and looking at the rest of the human race and start holding hands and do this together. There, that's my soapbox.
Well, your soapbox has me thinking now, especially in light of some of the earlier things that we've been discussing, where your topics are quite broad. Have you given much, if any, thought about another narrative, whether it be in comics or another medium, that is more overtly political?
Well, the minute you go political, you shut off half the world, especially in this day and age when we're on the verge of civil war, right? So I don't know. I think you will be more effective to be apolitical and be more concerned about the human race and the future of ourselves as a people, as opposed to more topical issues such as taxes and laws and rights and bills and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm more concerned with the walk of a human being on this planet. You have a very short time to do it, and you don't want to waste it on false agendas and doing stuff that really wasn't important in the long run. Someday you're going to be lying in an operating room and worried about ever getting out of it. And what are your last thoughts going to be? Are you going to be worried about who you voted for in the 2016 election? Or are you going to be worried about, the people you loved? So that's where my priorities are.
Okay. So let's say Donald Trump entering the race was enough to bring Berke Breathed back into comic strips, but it doesn't move you in the same way.
No, because, if you are even just a moderate student of American history, you'll know that we've had much worse presidents than him. Mm. Basically, every president between Lincoln and Roosevelt sucked. They were just pathetic. So Trump is not the worst guy that's ever happened to us. Presidents 5 through 12 were not that great. So we'll survive.
Well, are you a student of history?
I only in the broad sense. I'm not a specialist in any area, but I was very, very interested in just the social themes and how Americana tracked through the 20th century, and then that led me to the 19th and broadened my view of the arts and the industrial age and in our own frontier expansion. And I learned so much from all that. It's so applicable to what we do today. If all you know about America and human dynamics happened in the last 12 years, man, you've got a hell of a handicap. But what these big movers and shakers over the last 200 years, those things still work. Those rules still apply. So I've learned a lot from those people.
Well, would you ever consider your hand at a historically based comic?
Yeah, but I don't know if anybody would care. You'd have to time that at the right time. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. Like for instance, nobody wants a Western right now. If you wrote a Western TV pilot or a movie, you would have a hard time getting anybody to make that for you. And I've always wanted to do a Billy the Kid story or a Western story, but this just I'm not sure the audience is there. The young people today have zero connection with that era. I'm probably the last generation that ever saw a Western movie of any note. So anybody below the age of 40 doesn't care. So
yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, I remember one of the things you had told me when we did that interview for the blog a couple of years ago is that at some point you would like to try your hand at a sex story.
I would be really good at that because I would explore. It's not the physical act; it's the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think of all the times that Neil Simon wrote that conversation, and he did it in his own way, and I would have my own way of doing it, and I think my way I would be able to say things that people could plug into and empathize with. I don't know. That may be more of a play. Maybe I would do that as a play. I don't think it would be appropriate for a comic. The readership's not there. The readership is too young, and they just want, a certain type. Only certain types of comics are successful now, and this would not be one of them. But it would make for a hell of a play.
So that's not something you would take to Abstract Studio.
No. Well, Abstract Studio can do it, but I wouldn't do it in a comic book.
Yeah.
That's just my company, my incorporated entity. So I have wanted to write a play. So I think maybe that would be a good one to do.
Well, what are your plans after Rachel Rising? I mean, obviously you've talked about the television and then the film possibilities, but with Abstract Studio, are there any other comics tangibly on the horizon, or are you going to take Abstract Studios into multimedia?
Well, I'm definitely going into multimedia, but I'm not leaving comics. I mean, I want to make more comics. I'm not going to try to live or die by them anymore because the market is just, it's not conducive to it as it used to be. It's really all about Marvel DC right now. Everybody else can go to hell in terms of like what the comic market is saying right now. If you're not drawing a Marvel or a DC book, you're in a lot of trouble. You're struggling. So, except for Archie. Archie's doing fantastic. Boom has some good stuff. Really good stuff. So, yeah, there's exceptions out there. It's not that black and white. I don't mean to paint a black and white picture, but in terms of like an indie self-publisher guy like me, I need to broaden my footprint. I can't just stand on my comic retail orders and hope to survive another 20 years. So I have to, out of survival, just broaden into other mediums that I can work in.
Well, I have to say, I mean, the fact that this is you and your wife, Robin, I mean, you guys have had a really good run.
We have, and it's been incredible. But in some ways, we feel like the last couple standing in terms of what we do and the crowd we came from. I was with a big group of people, and they all moved on because they found success, commercial success. And a couple of those guys, they just, they don't ever have to work again. So I'm still cranking it.
Okay. Well, let me see. The final issue of Rachel Rising, number 42, will come out on the 25th, and you're going to be putting out this final volume, the collected trade of Rachel Rising, and this one's called Dust to Dust?
Yeah.
And then when will that be released?
Let's see. Soon. I've turned it in. It's at the printer.
Okay.
So, yeah, at a store near you soon.
Okay. And I remember hearing that last month at Emerald City Comic Con, you mentioned something about an omnibus collected edition of Rachel Rising.
Yeah, I'm putting the omnibus together now, as a matter of fact. And it's everything in one big book, 896 pages. And it's we're making a special collector's edition first, just as a reward for the hardcore fans, to give them something special to have that nobody else will have. We're making 750 copies of an omnibus that is all black on black cover, so it'll be very distinctive looking. And that one is we're taking orders for that. It only goes through me. It's not going to be in the stores. And then later this year, there will be a store version that comes out with the iconic first cover, green and red and black thing. And that'll be the same interior of the whole omnibus. There'll be a hardcover and a softcover.
Okay. So you're going to be doing something like you did not too long ago with Strangers in Paradise. The difference between that initial hardcover run and then the softcover.
Yes,
omnibus.
Exactly. There was a hardcover Strangers in Paradise omnibus that was private order, and that sold out. And then from then on, we did a mass-produced version that was softcover only. And so now, if you want a hardcover of Strangers in Paradise, you have to go to eBay. And it's going to be the same way with Rachel. I think we're doing this hardcover omnibus with the black cover. We're almost sold out. We still have some left available if you want to go to the website. And but once they're sold out, that's it. No reprints on that. And then the mass-produced color version will come out with color cover. That'll come out later, after San Diego.
Okay, so maybe in time for Halloween?
Yes.
Rather appropriate.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Well, Terry, I want to thank you for taking the time and talking with me. I cannot wait to see how the series wraps up in issue number 42.
It has a hell of an ending, so I hope you enjoy it.
I want to thank Terry once again for being on the Comics Alternative. It was great talking with him. I had interviewed him a couple of times in the past. About 3 years ago, I saw him at the Dallas Comic Con, and I spoke with him briefly then. And then a couple of years ago, I published on the blog a long interview with him, but that was a text-only interview. This is the first time that we've had Terry on the Comics Alternative one-on-one for a long podcast interview. So that was a great opportunity, especially on this bittersweet moment where we see the end of a great series, but I am anticipating quite a bit of satisfaction with the conclusion. So I can't wait to read issue number 42. And if you want to check out Terry Moore's comics, you would do well to visit the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. In fact, if you go to dcbservice.com right now and do a search on Rachel Rising, you'll find that the first 6 trade paperbacks are available for 35% off of the cover price. You can't find better deals than that. That's Discount Comic Book Service. And after you do get your Terry Moore comics there, get in touch with me and let me know what you think of my conversation with Terry Moore. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that you can leave us a voice message through SpeakPipe, which is really easy to use. Or if you want to call us the old-fashioned way, pick up the phone and dial 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. Or you can contact us the way that many people do, via email. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on various social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And now you can also listen to us on Spotify, and if you're an Android user, Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. We have a lot more interviews lined up in the weeks to come, so be sure to come back and listen to those. And until then, take care.